In Mark chapter 13, verses 26 and 27, Jesus is giving the famous Olivet Discourse. And you can see this also in a parallel passage of Matthew chapter 24. These two passages are always quoted for end-time events normally. Now, that isn't necessarily what we're going to be discussing today, but I would like to focus on something that is talked about a lot as well. So like I said, we'll be focusing specifically on Mark's account here and verses 26 and 27. And what 26 and 27 says is this, quote, "At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory." And then 27, "And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth and, to the ends of heaven." And end quote there. So this passage, many people, I should say, think that Jesus here is predicting his return, and that Jesus' return would happen within a generation of the people that he's speaking to, the disciples. And as they begin with this passage, they question Jesus about everything that's going to happen. And questions that kind of arise are things about the destruction of the Jewish temple. That's how the passage begins with Matthew 24 and Mark 13 specifically. Now, many view this passage as saying that Jesus will return at such a date, and he failed to do so. Therefore, he gave a false prediction, which would show Jesus as a false prophet of some sort. Or to some, maybe he wasn't a false prophet, but maybe this would just reveal that he isn't God or whatever it may be, depending on who's making this kind of argument. However, I'm not convinced that Mark 13 is actually about Jesus returning to earth. For example, a scholar that goes by N.T. Wright details that Mark 13 is about the destruction of the Jewish temple, not about Jesus' second coming. As mentioned here, verses 1 through 4 of Mark chapter 13 show Jesus and the disciples discussing the temple being destroyed. And then we see in verses 5 through 23, we see that there's going to be war and sacrilege in the temple, and Christians being persecuted, and so on. We see all kinds of events that are talked about that Jesus gives. Now again, a lot of people see this as the end of the world, and I don't think that's true either. I think all of these were first century fulfillments. However, when you look at all of this in its totality, you see that all of this seems to fit very well within that first century time frame. As in, everything was fulfilled here by 70 AD when the Romans came into Jerusalem and took down the temple, which was the second temple at this time. So the imagery Jesus uses in chapter 13, verses 26 through 29, it resembles that of Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, which must be mentioned that this is an upward event, not a downward one. And what I mean by this is it's about Jesus' ascension, not his return. This is similar to thinking of how a lot of people misunderstand the 1 Thessalonians passage that talks about Jesus supposedly returning here, and they think that this is a moment where Jesus raptures the church into the air. As in, they think that this one's an upward event, not a downward event, and it's actually the opposite. It's in 1 Thessalonians, it's not an upward event; it's a downward event. Jesus is coming down. No one is going upward. Jesus is the one going downward. But in this one, it's even different. It says now here so Jesus we see these signals of Jesus and the vindicated Son of Man and his establishment over all of the nations in this particular passage. We see in verse 27 that it says the gathering of the elect, and this can be understood as early Christians spreading the gospel message. But on such a view, Jesus did not fail to predict his return correctly. He merely described his ascension back to the right hand of God, the Father, and is firmly there until his return, which has no date set. As he stated, no one knows, only the Father, not even the angels. Now, I think a lot of this is somewhat controversial, but I do think this is a good counter-argument to the idea that people think that Jesus failed or had a false prediction of some sort. We see scholars like Dan McClellan as an example online that do think that this is an example of what Jesus did. We see that he thinks that Jesus just failed to predict his return correctly. Now, there are some other people that think that the passage describes Jesus' return, but that Jesus gave some kind of conditional prophecy, as in the prophecy would come true under some kind of condition. I'm not convinced of such an argument, but I did want to just at least kind of detail that there are some people that hold to such a position as well. Some bigger YouTube apologists, I've seen guys like Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, hold to such a position. But again, like I said, I'm not convinced of such a view, but I think it's good for people to at least hear that side as well. But that's 3 ways that you could look at this. You know, in this little short little video here, is you could see it the way that Dan McClellan sees it, that Jesus just flat out got it wrong and just simply was mistaken about his return. Or you could see the N.T. Wright view that sees this not as a passage about his return, but a passage about his vindication. Or you could take more of the Michael Jones view and say that Jesus was just simply giving a conditional prophecy. But I just wanted everybody to be aware of some of these other views that exist within these ideas of Mark 13 and Matthew 24. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and let me know what you guys all think down below of these views.